Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show, where we help you make the wisest and most profitable decisions. My name is Dr. Gleb Tsipursky. I'm the CEO of Disaster Avoidance Experts, the future of work consultancy that sponsors the Wise Decision Maker Show. And today with me is Dave Groh. He is the CEO of Lucid Software. And Dave, why don't you tell us a little bit about what Lucid Software does?
Absolutely. Thanks, Gleb. Lucid Software is the leader in visual collaboration software, which we've pioneered over the last decade plus, really to help teams see and build the future faster through more effective, more visual collaboration.
Now, I know you've been supporting hybrid teams and remote teams in collaborating effectively for the last 3 years. What have you seen as the biggest pain points in the last 3 years of collaboration?
Yeah, it's a great question because I think in many ways, collaboration is now harder than ever for many teams. And I think it largely comes down to a few things. First and foundationally, teams may struggle, I think, to form the same depth of personal relationships, which underscore, how we work together, right? Those natural interactions that often occur when we're physically near each other for hours every day, they're just not there. And so that's a new challenge for us. I think second, the old ways of working together and sharing ideas in person are no longer viable, right? We're not in the same conference room, standing in front of the whiteboard together. And so partially as a result of that, teams have adopted a lot of different technologies to try to fill that gap. But now workers, are often toggling between apps up to 1,200 times per day. And so that level of context switching can feel, I think, overwhelming and distracting. And then I think third and finally, there's this lack of alignment and connective tissue across the entire workflow, which slows progress down. And again, teams are looking to compensate for that, often by filling our calendars with meetings that may be unproductive, not particularly engaging, lack of true structure and accountability, and so on. So there's certainly a lot of new challenges with remote and hybrid work, even though, of course, it's brought a lot of benefits as well.
Yeah. Let's dive deeper into that last point. I've helped 23 companies by now transition to hybrid work and remote work, and definitely the overabundance of meetings is an issue. So I've been doing things like meeting-free Wednesdays and stuff like that. But I think the biggest thing that we've been doing to help companies address this, to help my clients address this, is to push asynchronous communication, maximize the amount of asynchronous communication, to leave the synchronous communication for the most important and intense forms of communication, collaboration, and asynchronous virtual communication, and the most intense form of collaboration we encourage clients to do in the office. Now, what are your thoughts on how to reduce meeting fatigue, how to increase the communication that can be done asynchronously effectively so that you save the most intense forms of collaboration for in office perhaps, or for fully remote teams for virtual synchronous communication?
Yeah. It's a great question. I think you hit, some of those fundamental elements there. First, we've got to decide what are the agreed upon norms for our team, our company, of how we're going to operate, right? When are we going to meet? When are we, in person? What decisions and communication can happen via Slack or Teams or some other form, and what has to happen via email? So I think one, establishing those norms around it is important, because I think I recently read in Harvard Business Review that we're spending 15% more time in meetings since 2020. And so, I think there's a couple key elements of this. One is the meetings that we do have, we have to make them much more valuable, much more effective. Because I think we've all been in that situation where it's because the meeting itself was not as productive, we say, well, let's take it offline, or let's have another follow-up meeting. And so if we make the meeting itself more productive, and we can talk about how to do that, I actually think it starts to decrease other meetings. And then second, as you said, there's this, I think, critical role of asynchronous collaboration. And again, a lot of that used to happen when we were physically next to each other, the candid, quick conversations here and there. That no longer exists in the same form. And when it does, it may leave certain people out. And so I think having the right tools and technologies to sort of really bind people together with asynchronous and synchronous collaboration is critical. And that's actually where we believe visual collaboration can play a critical role. Yes, in making meetings more effective, but also before the meeting, during the meeting, and after the meeting, tying together the work that we're doing in a much more effective way.
So I'm curious, what have you been doing inside Lucid to facilitate those communication and to create those norms and etiquettes that you've been talking about?
Yep. Well, I think, some of the same ones you hit, and it depends by team. And I think that's a critical part here is I don't think there's a one size fits all approach. Because I think it depends a lot on the team members and how they learn, how they communicate, how they collaborate most effectively. And then, so I think part of it is establishing that autonomy with managers and giving them the right tools and trainings, for them to decide how they want to operate. And so, for example, we have certain teams where they have done, similar things where they say Wednesdays are no meeting Wednesdays. And that works very well for the type of work that they do, because, they need to get heads down and get in the flow for a long period of time. There are other teams where that's not as effective. And so, I think that's one great example, but it's specific to the team. Sure. I think another big part of this is, again, establishing a home base for teams, if you will. And so let me give you an example of this. In Lucid Spark, our virtual whiteboard product, if I have a key offsite coming up, I'll establish a canvas or a board that helps outline what are the topics and activities that we're going to work through that day. And then I'm going to share that in advance and ask for people to, asynchronously start to work through their thoughts and ideas, put those and share them on the canvas. And then when we actually get physically together, or virtually together, we can then, cluster those ideas, vote on them, and have deeper debate and discussion. And so separating, the work into those norms of what should be done asynchronously versus synchronously, I think is important.
Now let's talk about that visual collaboration, because that's what you have a lot of expertise in. What is the difference and what is best suited for visual collaboration versus, text-based collaboration in asynchronous communication in particular?
Well, if you think about the types of, different work that we do, ideation, planning, people, process, and systems design, a lot of those things are much better and faster understood visually. If I asked you, for example, to describe a process, any process in your company, your accounts receivable process, for example, you start to think there are multiple people engaged in that. There are multiple steps. There are likely multiple technologies or systems. That gets really complex really fast if I ask you to use text alone. And so, I think particularly with more complex ideas, projects, organizational design, those things are just much better understood and communicated and collaborated around when you can see them. Whereas I think, simpler things, the day-to-day back and forth to maybe, flesh out an idea slightly, I think those things, great for text. But most, I think, textual communication and collaboration can and should be supplemented and complemented visually, because most teams have the fundamental need to ideate and brainstorm together. That's done more effectively visually when you can see it on a canvas together rather than people just talking at one another. Most teams have the need, again, to understand or collaborate around the people and process and technologies that impact their work. And again, those things are much better understood and collaborated around visually. So there's a role for each, certainly, but I think historically we have been entirely way too focused on text-based collaboration, and now I think we're seeing, the surge for visual collaboration for good reason, particularly with remote and hybrid work.
Now, I'm curious. So we've been talking about what has been happening recently, and one of the big developments in collaboration tools, information tools, is the rise of AI. And of course, the chat version, the text-based version, has been getting a lot of attention, but there is also the image generation version, DALL-E, Midjourney, and so on. What are your thoughts about the future of visual collaboration in the context of the rise of AI, both the chat, text generation, and the visual generation?
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating space and moving so quickly, which is incredible to see. And so I think, obviously the approach we're taking is, one, listening to our customers, and two, being students of what's happening, with other companies and and with other leaders in the space. And, I think part of what, the opportunity here is to dramatically, open up the aperture of how you interact to create, visuals more effectively, more powerfully, more quickly. Because for many people, actually, dragging and dropping out, the shapes and working through those ideas is very helpful. For others, they need that end process described, or they need that organizational chart, or whatever it may be. But they would actually prefer to do that in a very structured way, and that may be text-based. And so I think the inputs in how many of these great visuals will be developed and created will combine both of what you're describing. Some users will want and need to be able to type or even talk out their ideas and have that visualized very quickly. Others will still want to use, I think, the traditional drag and drop format, because that's helps them actually get their ideas out. And so, I think that's a big part of it, is the inputs. I think then also the outputs. None of us want to spend a lot of time making things look great. I'm a former consultant. I've spent way too many hours of my life in slides. And a lot of that time was not spent in developing great ideas or great ways to visualize things, but was actually, the very basics of making it look good. And I think AI has the opportunity to shortcut that very significantly, where we can get our ideas out, and then the AI can assist us in both the formatting, the structure, and so on, to help us convey that information, much more compellingly.
As a current consultant, I can certainly appreciate what you're saying about spending time with slides, trying to make them look good for clients.
Absolutely.
Now, as we're thinking about the future, what are your thoughts about how businesses can most effectively facilitate collaboration, especially among hybrid and remote teams, using these visual tools, using other forms of collaboration, and thinking about the AI as a component of that future?
Well, I think first, we have to recognize as leaders, it's a time for reinvention. I think the first 12, 18 months, even after COVID began, sending many companies into remote, a hybrid situation, a lot of employees, leaders, and companies were just trying to keep pace. And that meant many things were done the same way as before, but now just over video conference. And I think we all recognize that's an insufficient amount of change. But I think it requires a commitment and a deliberate decision to say, we're going to take a step back and be willing to reinvent and rethink the way we work, the way we collaborate, and so on, across the company and within specific roles. Second, as I mentioned earlier, I would invest in manager training, to bring them along in this process, both from a skills perspective, but also to help them understand everything that's going on in AI. I think for many, reading headlines right now about AI being able to replace lots of jobs and roles, there's a little bit of fear around it.
Sure.
Whereas I think if we empower our managers to say, well, again, step back, and with us, with these fundamental principles that we're establishing as a company, let's collaborate and think about how your team, can be much more effective using AI and different technologies. Right. But I think managers have a much more elevated role in remote and hybrid work than they did even just a few years ago. But we have to really, I think, empower them through the right training. And then the last thing I'll say, particularly as it relates to, technology, is there has to be that willingness to adopt, but I think also rationalize toward the right technology. One of the most common discussions we're having with customers these days is that their teams adopted a lot of disparate technologies over the last couple of years. And now, both from a pure dollar cost perspective, but also from a soft cost perspective of productivity and collaboration, they recognize the need to go through a rationalization process and place their bets on the winners for the next few years. And the reason why Lucid in these cases, specific to visual collaboration, is being selected is because we can distinctly show a couple of things that I think are important, regardless of the space. That Lucid is an end-to-end visual collaboration platform, lives across the entire life cycle of work. And so, we can comfortably and confidently replace many point solutions, Perhaps one that is for whiteboarding, another for mind mapping, one for diagramming, and for org chart creation, and so on, all into a single end-to-end platform, that helps with that context switching and productivity. And B, that Lucid is deeply integrated with all the other systems in your productivity and collaboration tech stack, which enables to work to move much faster and drive better collaboration and efficiency. And so I think as companies and leaders are thinking about this, I think it's that commitment to reinvent and step back. I think it's 2, enabling and empowering managers to be on that journey with us as a company. And then 3, being willing to adopt and rationalize toward the right technologies.
Excellent. Well, that's a really inspiring message on which to wrap up. Are there any last words with which you wish to leave our audience, Dave?
I would say that the need for visual collaboration, our category, is continuing to grow. According to Gartner, by 2024, visual collaboration applications will be the center of 30% of meeting experiences. That's next year. And so what I would leave your listeners with and readers with, if you and your team are not yet leveraging visual collaboration in that way, I'd encourage you to ask, why not?
Good question. Thank you very much, Dave. That was very helpful.
Thank you, Gleb.
And thank you to the audience for checking out another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. If you haven't yet, please make sure to subscribe wherever you check this out and leave a review. It really helps others discover the show and helps us improve the show. All right, everyone. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. In the meantime, the wisest and most profitable decisions to you, my friends.